Welcome to the MacJury. This is the home of truth, justice, and the Macintosh way. I'm Chuck Joyner, and folks, it's time for another one of our first Weekend With shows, this time, of course, with the iPad mini Wi-Fi. And we've assembled a group of experts and new iPad mini owners to tell us all about it. So let's go around the room and find out who you're going to be hearing from and hopefully seeing. First up, Miss Katie Floyd. Katie, it's great to have you, as always.
Hey, Chuck. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Katie Floyd, along with David Sparks. I do the Mac Power Users podcast over on the 5x5 network.
Terrific. It's always great to have you. Next up, Mr. John Martellaro. John, it's a pleasure to have you back. You have been here for a while.
Nice to be here. Nice to be back. I am senior editor for analysis and reviews at the Mac Observer.
I think we've heard of that somewhere.
Yeah.
And last but absolutely not least, for his very first time on the MacJury, Mr. Derrick Story. Derrick, I'm so happy to have you. I keep trying to get you on. You're always jetting off to Germany or Japan or China or somewhere.
I'm sticking around for a little bit now, just to be on this show, actually. Anyway, so everything that I'm doing, Chuck, just goes through thedigitalstory.com. So that's sort of my universe right there, and I happily maintain it.
And Derrick, my perception is the Digital Story just keeps growing. I mean, it's podcast, it's website, it's wow.
Yeah, I mean, we're having a blast, actually. The podcast is doing very well. It's a weekly podcast. I've been doing it since 2005, actually, and just once a week for 30 minutes, but mainly photography. It's sort of the intersection of Macintosh and photography, and I love doing it. I never would have thought 360 episodes ago that I could have 360 topics in me, but it's funny, it's such an exciting time that there's always something to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I especially like the fact that you keep it up even though you're traveling, which is no mean feat. Even after indulging it in Oktoberfest in Germany.
Yes, yeah. That one was a little rougher, the one I did the morning after Oktoberfest in a hotel room in Munich, yes.
Well, guys, we're here to talk about our little friend, the iPad mini, our new little friend, the iPad mini. Here's mine. I'm sure everybody can show theirs. I got the black with slate.
Do we have to have one of those?
No, you don't have to. Well, to talk about it.
Chuck, is there one under my chair?
Honest, Chuck, we'll let you do the show, I promise.
There you go, okay. No, I'm kind of curious. I got the black and slate. Anybody go for a different color?
I actually don't have one. Am I still allowed to stay here?
I'm shocked, Katie, but sure, we're never going to throw you out.
I'm close. I'm real close. I'm seriously considering getting the 4G, but I have spent hands-on time with one, so I think that was your requirement for this panel.
Absolutely. The other thing, too, and we usually talk about this just kind of quickly, anybody go and line up for this, or did you get them delivered by UPS?
I got, by the way, to answer your first question, I got the black and slate, and I really like the back cover on this, the slate. I think it's just gorgeous. It's pretty cool. Stuff doesn't stick to it, though, as I discovered. But I did UPS. I went the UPS route. I just ordered it right away. I need it for some stuff I'm working on, and I wanted to stay here and work at the office, and so they just brought it to me, and it worked out great.
John?
I ordered mine pre-ordered. I ordered a 32 gigabyte black, and it came on Friday. We were on pins and needles. UPS was very late, so we had a pre-signature taped to the door just in case. First thing I noticed was that this slate back is very smooth, very slick, and if you rest it on top of the box, like I did, and you put it on the table, and the box is at maybe like a 2 or 3 degree angle, whoosh, it slides right off to the box and hit the hardwood floor right off the top. Yeah.
Oh, so you did a durability test.
That's right, a case-free crash test.
Right.
And it didn't blink. I mean, it's not nicked or scratched, and it's perfect.
It's now that's the
first test I did.
Now, there were some questions and concerns about the black iPhone 5s when they came out being very scratchable. which is one of the reasons I'm very glad I got my white iPhone 5 here. I haven't had any issues with that. And then there was also some rumors that Apple was going back and kind of perfecting that manufacturing process to avoid some of those scratches. Do you think they've perhaps changed their manufacturing process? Can you tell any difference between the fit and finish of the iPad mini and the iPhone 5, for example?
Looks the same to me.
I hadn't thought about it, Katie, but I don't.
Yeah, I mean, the fit and finish is good, and I haven't had any issues with the screen or the back or any of that sort of stuff. It feels good. It's, you do the test where you run your fingers along the edge of it.
Well, if you would pull out your car keys and just scratch along the back of it and see if...
Darn, I don't know where those keys are right now.
Camphor along the edge is very nice.
Yeah. It feels very well made, as you would expect.
Of course.
Okay, so I thought what might be kind of fun to start though is this thing is full of expectations, right? Or we're full of expectations about this thing, and so some of the expectations of some of mine were met, and then there's some areas of a little bit disappointment. So I thought that might be kind of a fun place to start the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess for me the first thing was it's an iPad, and I mean by that that
only smaller.
Yeah, everything runs on it. It's not like I had to really worry about it. There are some issues with GPS and all that we'll get into in a minute. But overall, it just is a much more accessible, a little more affordable iPad. John?
Yeah, it's funny. For me, I agree with that. And when the first iPad came out, or early in the iPad, they said, hey, this is not a device for creating things. This is a device for consuming things. And I sort of pushed against that because I have an iPad 3 that I just love, and I create all sorts of stuff on it. But I do think that this iPad is more for consuming and less for creating by virtue of its size and its specs too. They did throttle the specs on this a bit, and it's great for reading the newspaper, and it's great for watching movies and enjoying stuff. Not so good on the camera side, and the Retina display that isn't there is a little bit of a disappointment. A5 instead of A6 on the processor. So it's interesting the choices they made, and I'm assuming a lot of that had to do with the price.
But staying on that creating versus consumption question for a minute, what is it? I really struggled with that for a long time too, because I want my iPad in many cases to be that everything device, but I found more and more that it really wasn't. When I was going on a business trip, or when I hesitate to say this, but when I really needed to get work done, not so much in my personal life, because my personal life is all tied into the Apple ecosystem, and the iPad works great in that, but particularly in my professional career, tying into our Windows-based server system at the office and remote desktoping back into that and things like that, those things were all doable on the iPad, but it was a struggle for me to go away for a day or two to take depositions or to go to mediation and have the iPad be my only computer. And what I was finding that I was doing with the iPad more often than not, 90+% of the time, was consumption. And for just about everything that I do in that consumption realm with the iPad, it seems to me that this iPad mini form factor is going to be better. It's going to be thinner, it's going to be lighter, it's going to be more portable. With the exception of that Retina display thing, I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Yeah. Well, and for consuming, I agree with you. Of course, much different world for me than for you. So I'm a photographer. I'm looking for the iPad to be part of my workflow, so I don't have to carry a computer with me all the time. That I can take pictures and put them right in there, and do the editing, and then upload them to my website or to a social network. And for those areas, the iPad iPad 2, the iPad 3 were actually quite good. They still are. And the Mini is not bad in that area either, but I can use it for most of what I do during the course of a day. Now, if I'm going to write an article, I don't want to write it on an iPad. I want to write it on a laptop, of course, where I have a real keyboard. But a lot of take a picture, upload it, and write a caption and get it online sort of stuff. For me, iPad works great for all of that sort of stuff. And, so it really does come down into, what are your responsibilities? What do you need to do with it?
Yeah.
John, I want to get you in this. This is a debate that always comes up no matter when we talk about iPad. Creation versus consumption, replacing a laptop. Do you think those are really important points, or is it just a matter of, does this device do something that you want to do?
Oh, no, absolutely. And Derrick hit the nail on the head, because I've been working on my review for the Mac Observer all day long, and that was one of the first things I noticed is that because of the smaller virtual keyboard, because of the smaller display, it really is more focused on content consumption, even more so. In my review, I wrote that I could see how if you had to, on a full-size iPad, you could write a short article with the virtual keyboard. Mm-hmm. I know people who could do it and do it. Jeff Gamet is great at using the keyboard because he just magically knows where all the keys are, and he can write a good article. My fingers tend to drift, and so the text that I type on an iPad looks like gibberish because my finger will drift and I'll be off by one, and it's all nonsense. So I think in that respect, the iPad Mini is really, really more towards consumption. But getting back to what you were talking about before, the first reaction I had to it was how thin it is and how charming it is to hold in your hand. I mean, it has a different fundamental nature in physically holding it because of that sensation of being so delicate and so thin. And then you look at the display and you see all the things that you're used to on a full-size iPad. And all of a sudden, the full-size iPad seems like sort of a brick. But then I started thinking about it some more, and I realized that you really have to think about the application, like Derrick was saying. And I spend a lot of time in my review on that. Is you have to have a very clear idea about what the mission for this is. You have to understand how you're going to deploy it, what the advantage is, why you're going to use a smaller device, and in the process, it'll pay off if you exploit the size and understand the compromises. But if you buy it on a whim or because you think you want a smaller display rather than a bigger display, I think you might be disappointed in some ways.
And the fifth member of this MacJury panel has just joined us. He got here a little late, but all that means is he's got to buy the drinks. Mr. Julio Ojeda-Zapata from the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Julio, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Nice to see you again, Chuck. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been. It has been. And I assume that you've had your hands on a Mini or have one in your possession?
Yeah, Apple gave me a review unit a few days ago, and I've been using it fairly heavily over the weekend. And once I got past the Retina display issue, I got over that fairly quickly and proceeded to get immersed in using the iPad Mini. It's just the fact that it's so lighter than the regular iPad. The fact that it runs all my favorite apps. Once I get past the Retina issue, I stopped noticing after a while, except when I needed to read very small text. And beyond that, it's just a fantastic device. I'm a little slightly troubled by the price, but beyond that, I have absolutely no complaints. It's a terrific product.
We've just been going around the table comparing our experiences and sort of initial impressions, and it sounds like you just caught up very quickly. The only question I didn't hear is, what did they give you, a white or a black, and what configuration?
I always bet on black, to quote Wesley Snipes. And that's a good question. I can't remember I think they gave me the top of the line unit. I actually haven't looked, but and I have Nexus 7, and I have the Kindle Fire HD at home, and I've sort of been comparing them, and impressed with how thin Apple has managed to make this device. It makes those other tablets look a little bulky. The display on the Kindle Fire HD obviously is superior, but my bottom line is it really gets down to the apps. If you buy a Kindle Fire HD, your issue is that Amazon sort of curates what apps you can put on the device. You're very limited. You don't have the app number limitation on the Nexus 7, but the other issue there is there are very few really truly excellent tablet native apps on the Android side. Apple has a good point there. It's really using an Android tablet is extremely frustrating because I just can't find really good apps. Tweetbot is a good example of an absolutely superb app on the iOS side. So I'm inclined to sort of get past the hardware issues such as price and lack of Retina, and simply state that if you're going to make a tablet buying decision, it really gets down to the apps, and that's where iOS really has the upper hand, and that's where I think Apple can sort of get away with charging a little more for the device.
Well, now I'm curious, and you bring up the Kindle, the weight factor. My experience in handling a Kindle Fire, I don't own one, but I have played with them. It struck me as so heavy, and this isn't. The one that I'm comparing it to, and I wore the jacket tonight for a good reason, because that's a Kindle Paperwhite. And it does fit in a jacket pocket, and the iPad Mini doesn't.
Is it bulletproof?
Now, so the iPad Mini, is it too wide? It just is too wide to fit in the jacket pocket?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wider than the other ones. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, Katie, here, I'll try to do a face-to-face comparison.
Oh, it's quite a bit wider, I see.
It is a bit wider. But, I have to tell you that I've been having a good time with the Paperwhite up until the iPad Mini. And I don't mind the backlighting for reading. In fact, I prefer it. So now the Paperwhite is going to be restricted to pretty much outdoor reading whenever I need it, or just as a really, truly a secondary book reader, because the Mini, even though it doesn't fit in my jacket pocket, I'd rather carry it or have it with me. And I'm curious if are there any other Kindle users here?
Yeah, I have a Paperwhite also, and I really love it. And the issue with non-iPad tablets is they tend to be a little narrower. They tend to be a little more rectangular, and that's great.
That's the 16:9 aspect ratio? Is that what everything else has?
Yeah, pretty much, and that's where you get into the issue of being able to tuck non-iPad tablets into spaces that an iPad wouldn't fit, because it's a little more squarish. But I think the bottom line for me there is the dimensions of an iPad make a lot more sense, because it therefore feels more natural to use it in both landscape and portrait mode. Using a 7-inch non-Apple tablet in portrait mode is extremely weird. It feels very constrained because of the way you're holding the tablet and the way the content looks on the tablet, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think Apple has exactly the right idea with the way it constructed the dimensions of both a full-size tablet, a full-size iPad, and the iPad Mini. And that's why the Mini, once I got past the whole Retina issue, is so immersive. It's so incredible. You start using it and you sort of forget. You sort of forget you're even holding a tablet. You're just immersed in the experience. And I haven't had that sensation with other tablets. I've been using the Surface, and the Surface, has the very same issue. It's highly rectangular, and so when you're using it in landscape mode, it sort of makes sense. But when you flip it over, it's so tall and so narrow that it just feels unnatural, and you notice that the whole time. And the Surface, the other issue with the Surface, it's so big and bulky, and it feels so heavy. The full-size iPad has that same issue to a degree. The lightness of the iPad Mini is huge. I mean, it's absolutely huge. It feels so great. You don't get tired using it. You can just hold it in one hand and read a book or whatever.
One of the first things I noticed about the Mini is that even though it seems really, really well made and tight and beautiful. It also has a sense of, I don't know, vulnerability or a delicateness to it because it's so small. You feel like it's easy to bump or knock. It doesn't seem to have that frying pan feel of a regular iPad where you can throw it on the coffee table and not worry about it because it weighs so much and it's not going to go anywhere. And so I'm thinking the first thing I'm going to do is get a case for the iPad Mini to protect it because it does
Something
seem
more
to be kind of
substantial than
vulnerable.
just the smart cover.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
what
thinking about
Apple's
some
obviously
sort of
promoting.
I think I'm going to put a folio case on there that will protect the back and the front. I've never been a big fan of the Apple cases.
Derrick, did you get one of the cases, or I should say the smart covers?
I did, and I'm just going naked here. I should say. just carrying this thing around the way it is. I mean, I have a slot for it in my my messenger bag where it fits in nicely, and then the rest of the time I'm just kind of carrying it around. I know it. I really understand what John is saying about the where it feels different. It does feel, I think, because it's so light and so thin, it does feel a little bit more fragile. But I don't think it really is. I think it's solid.
It's solid.
It's solid.
Like I said, I've top tested it already.
Yeah.
I just had an interesting thought that I didn't think about before. There's a lot of carry bags that Nancy Gravely at Mac Observer has reviewed, and often they have a main carrying case for like a MacBook Air or a small MacBook Pro, and then they have a side pocket for an iPad. And I always thought it was kind of crazy to carry around a 13-inch MacBook Air and a full-size iPad as well. And so I'm thinking that maybe this small size has its utility in some cases where you need to carry a notebook computer, but you want to have a smaller iPad too.
Yeah, I mean, I like cases. I mean, I think, I'm a photographer, so cases for photographers are like purses for women in that sense, and that we have more than we ever admit to. And the first thing I did was I
have more
looked,
cases than I do purses.
Yeah, then I knew someone would take exception to that, but I think you get my point. And that so the first thing that I did was that I went through and just sort of, okay, what cases will this thing fit in? How can I use it? Where will it fit? And it's surprising how many both camera cases and different types of laptop cases actually had slots that the Mini fits in perfectly. So it's very easy on cases that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I use an inexpensive, no-brand backpack that I bought on Amazon.com that I love. It's a great backpack, and it has in one of the pockets has a pocket inside a pocket that is that is perfect size for the Paperwhite or the iPad Mini. And that since I'm using mine naked with the smart cover as well, I just tuck it in there. It fits perfectly. It's well protected, and I couldn't be happier. I do lug around a laptop, and in the past I've been lugging a laptop and a full-size iPad around. It's a little much, and the iPad Mini with the laptop is the perfect portability
that's a great combo. That's really a good combo. Yeah, it's very nice.
The only thing I found that I miss, I have a Zugu case for my iPad, which I've extolled the virtues of plenty of times. It's not the sexiest case, it's not the sleekest, but it lets you prop the full-size iPad up at any angle you want. And I find that great for consumption or even just using it at the office on the desk.
Yeah.
And I'm missing that right now with the smart cover. I almost hate to add the bulk to this thing, but I really do miss just that function of being able to cock it at exactly any angle that I want.
The smart cover doesn't go high enough for me either. So, I start digging around and you start finding, do you guys have boxes with junk like this in it? I mean, this isn't junk. I shouldn't say. I didn't mean it that way with odds and ends. But this is like an insanely great, that's the name of the company. It's just a little holder for iPhone, so it works great for the iPad, and so I just have it here on the desk, and just having that little bit of angle made all the difference in the world. I don't like it flat on the table. I think it's hard to use that way. I think it needs a little bit. You need a little angle there.
There are a couple of stands that you might consider investing in, Chuck. One is called the 3 feet. It's number 3 feet. 3 feet. It's sort of a adjustable plastic, but surprisingly durable stand that can be folded and refolded in various configurations, and it's very versatile. It can be used for anything from a smartphone to a full-size tablet, and it's perfect, absolutely perfect for the iPad Mini. The other stand that I really like is called the Stump, which is basically basically kind of a rubber circle with a notch cut into it. And I've been using the Stump with the iPad Mini on my desk. I just prop out the iPad Mini to sort of watch notifications that are coming in. And those have for a long time have been my absolute favorite stands because they're very unobtrusive yet very versatile. And I found that they work brilliantly with the iPad Mini.
The Stump is cool. I like the Stump too.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it's funny you say that. I've had the Stump on my bedside table to drop my iPhone in at night to give me my my clock and everything right beside me.
And so the Stump is a little heavy, so it's not as portable. But the 3 feet is the ultimate mobile solution because it's plastic, very lightweight, very versatile. It folds flat when you're not using it, and it tucks perfectly into one of those little side pockets that most backpacks and messenger bags have. So I absolutely love that.
Good. I'll have to check that out. Katie, I'm curious because you're the one here who has had some hands-on time but decided not to invest just yet. What's your reaction to all this, and do you disagree with any of the observations made so far?
Well, I can tell you the primary reason that I did not pre-order because I've been very happy with my 3rd generation ancient, now, obsolete iPad. And I just thought, why mess with perfection? I'm very happy with it. It's only 6 months old. Why do I need something else? And I didn't really think I would need a smaller form factor. And we discussed, I think it was a Mac Roundtable. I don't know. I don't think you were on it, Chuck, but we talked all about the iPad Mini. And I went to bed that night after the Apple announcement very confident that I was not buying anything. This didn't impact me in any way. And that was that. And then I got up the next morning and the wheels just kind of started turning. And that iPad 3 got really, really heavy. I mean, just overnight. I don't know what happened. But I came to the realization, I really started focusing on how is it that I use my iPad. And I'm finding I really am using it as a consumption device. I'm really not taking it out and about as much as I hoped or thought that I might. It's my bedside table device. It's my coffee table device. Some days it doesn't even move off my bedside table. It's the first thing I reach for in the morning and the last thing I put down at night. And all the ways that I use an iPad, how would not having something thinner and lighter and smaller not be beneficial? And that's what really started getting to me. But then gosh, this Retina display, and is it going to be too small? And for me, there were a lot of questions. I was really concerned about how comfortable it was going to be, how functional it was going to be. Was the screen just going to be too small? So I wanted to hold one in my hand. I wanted to see what the non-Retina screen looked like. Was it something I could go back to? I wanted to know how the keyboard worked because I do very regularly punch out a couple of paragraphs worth of emails at a time. If I do any heavy-duty writing on it, I'm going to pull out an external keyboard. But that's really questions that I wanted answered before I pre-ordered because I don't need 2 iPads in my life. I really only need one. And so if I were to go and buy an iPad Mini, it would probably mean getting, not that I couldn't have 2 iPads, but, I'm one person. I only have 2 hands. I don't need an iPad in every hand. And I don't really have a place in my life for 2 iPads. So if I were to go out and buy an iPad Mini, it would really be replacing my 3rd generation iPad. And before I did that, I wanted to touch it and feel it and see it and know that this was a worthy device to replace my 3rd gen.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And if I were talking about not something that Apple lends me for review, but talking about an iPad for myself, and I had to choose between the Mini and the full-size iPad, the big issue for me is productivity. I don't just use an iPad as a productivity device. I don't use an iPad as a consumption device. I also use it for productivity, for writing, In fact, I'm in the process of working on a book along those lines about using an iPad for productivity. And the iPad Mini, my sense is it's a little too small, a little too cramped for getting stuff done. It's great if you want to watch a movie. Like I tape a lot of my TV shows using Elgato and transfer the files over to. I watched 60 Minutes on the Mini this morning. It was great. But if I wanted to write a story for a paper or blog or whatever, it's too small. It's not a good productivity device. You absolutely need the full size iPad. Some accessory makers are coming out with keyboard cases for the Mini. That
doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, it just seems like it's going to be incredibly cramped.
Exactly. There's a Zagfolio version for the Mini coming out. Madness. It's the keyboard is just going to be too cramped. It doesn't make any sense at all to me. So people who are weighing an iPad purchase have to decide, do a gut check on whether they're pretty certain they're only going to use it for consumption or whether they're going to try to get stuff done. A lot of journalists and bloggers and tech pundits and so forth, they take their iPads on the road and use them as their primary productivity devices when they're in a mobile setting, and those people are just not going to want a Mini. They're gonna want to stick with the full size.
On a consumption standpoint, the first thing that I thought about on the iPad Mini was I'm not going to be syncing this to the cloud so that every app that I buy on the iPad 3 is going to show up there, because there are a lot of apps that I don't think would work well or that I don't need on the iPad Mini. I think of it more as a casual book reading, email, portable device, but I'm really not very optimistic about the prospects of, say, putting Zinio on it and trying to read, a full-page magazine with, lots of little drawings and pictures and tiny captions underneath the pictures and everything. It works okay, kind of, on the iPad 3, and I wish I had a bigger iPad for magazines, that was 8.5 by 11, but reading a magazine on Zinio on the iPad Mini doesn't seem like a productive thing to do. So I've turned off the sync, and I'm only putting just a few specialized apps on there that I think are really going to, really work well and showcase the size of that. That's
a really good point, and I've noticed that I'm of the opinion that app makers are going to have to do a lot of tweaking to their apps, because I think a lot of apps are optimized for the full size iPad screen, and when you sort of smush things down to the Mini size, a lot of those touch controls are sometimes a little difficult to hit the right way. Even some of Apple's iOS interface elements, like the little X inside the search window, I'm finding it impossible to hit it properly.
Yeah.
And so Apple and third-party app developers, I'm fairly certain are going to be doing some fairly crazy tweaking.
A good example of that is that Sky Safari, the Sky Chart program. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful on a 10-inch display, but why would you want to look at the celestial sphere on a little 7-inch iPad? It wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Well, my understanding is developers are going to be able to customize apps for the 10-inch, the 7-inch, or the iPhone. So they're not going to be, if you truly want to have a hybrid app, you can have a hybrid app for all three. So you can do it all in one.
And that'll make perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
John, I think you're the one that said it. That was something that I was very conscious of since I did not order a 64 gig. I've created this as a new iPad, and I've been very selective about what I've put on it, just because I don't want to run out of space. And I've found it a very good exercise to go through and sort of weed out some apps that I thought maybe I wanted to keep, but I just don't use and I never get around to.
Yeah, they're very different devices. I mean, that's just the only thing they have in common really is, the name, and, they run the same apps and stuff. But I think the iPad Mini is much different than my iPad 3. It's huge. And there's a lot of stuff that I just wouldn't put on the Mini just because it doesn't need it. It doesn't work. It's not necessary. I think, as we were saying at the top of the show, this is a device that's great for consumption. The only thing that I would add to what folks here are saying is that I think there's room for both. I mean, I think that there are certain things I want to do on my iPad 3, and there are certain things I want to do with the Mini. And if I'm reading in bed, the iPad Mini is much more fun. If I'm doing some serious photography work in iPhoto for iOS, I like the bigger iPad. So it's funny. Now, not everyone has the luxury of having both, but I do think that they are each kind of in their own little realm there.
I can talk about that because when I first got my iPhone back in 2007, I was loading it up with everything. I had all these game simulators and games, and and it was just filling.
You want to see what it can do?
Yeah, because it was the only iOS device I had. Yeah. Then when I got my first iPad in 2010, I realized I had all this crap on the iPhone that really didn't do well on that little tiny display, and I just deleted everything. And then the iPad 3 became the dumping ground, for all this experimental stuff. And that's why I always get a 16 gig iPhone, is because I treat it as a phone and a navigator and a communication device, and it's not an experimental playground for iOS apps.
So what I'm hearing just about everybody on this panel say is that they're going to have and regularly use probably a laptop and 10-inch iPad and an 8-inch iPad and maybe a desktop.
Mm-hmm.
And a phone.
And a MacBook Air.
And who says this is a recession?
I don't think that's the point, Katie.
Gosh. Please excuse me while I go buy more Apple stock.
Well, I'm a photographer. We're used to the same thing in photography, too. I mean, I don't know how many cameras I have. I have a lot of cameras, and there's probably 6 or 7 of them that I use regularly. And this is a great time, the way I see it, because I have a much better, I don't have to use one screwdriver for every job now. I have, a whole set of screwdrivers, a whole set of wrenches. And I actually look at this the same way. It's a luxury. No doubt about it. It's an absolute luxury, but it's one that I really enjoy. Yeah.
Talking about tools, I have a MacBook Air, and I couldn't live without it because when I'm tired of sitting at my desk and I've got this big displays and I'm doing all this stuff, and there's Twitter running and there's email running and there's the Skype chat room, and sometimes I just want to get away from it, and so I walk into another room, sit in a recliner, and I sit and I write with a MacBook Air, and it's the perfect tool for writing a story in a recliner.
Yeah,
so,
Derrick,
I do the same thing.
That point is so well taken, and it seems to be something that it escapes everyone, and we all kind of dance away from it. These are different devices. I over the weekend I was catching up on some of your podcasts and your camera arsenal episode.
Yeah, exactly.
And I thought that's exactly what this is. Each device is capable or is more capable for certain things. What's wrong with that, and why is that a surprise?
Yeah, they're designed. They're designed with a certain, I think, scenarios in mind, and I think it's the danger I had with the Mini, and I had to warn myself of this when I first opened it up, was that don't treat it as a regular iPad. Don't, reset my expectations for this and just let it be its own thing. Let me discover it for what it is and not try to make it something else. And by doing that, I think I had a better experience than maybe trying to say, hey, I was disappointed. I was like Julio. I was disappointed with lack of Retina display. I wanted a better camera in it because of photographer. I wanted the A6 chip. There's a lot of things I wanted. I had to back off all of that and just let it be what it is and then discover what that's good for.
Great point.
I know that everybody on this panel is a little unique because we're journalists, we're Mac pundits, we're photographers, we live and breathe in this world. But if I can get us to back up for that for 1 minute, I would imagine the great majority of the people who are listening to this podcast are probably Mac enthusiasts, but maybe don't live and breathe this as much, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what do I do? What is the place in this for me? Where is the future of the iPad line? Do you think the iPad Mini is going to become what the iPod Mini was 5 years ago or 7 years ago, and really eclipse the original iPod line? or iPad line? Is this going to be the most popular iPad?
I think it has a very good chance of when we get to the second and third generation Mini. I think it's going to be a formidable device. I really do, and I think it may become the most popular.
I would be inclined to disagree. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I thought that too when it first came out, and Erica Sadoun wrote an article about that too, cannibalizing the iPad 3 sales. And Brian Chaffin at Mac Observer said I was on crack because I think the iPad Mini is so focused, and you have to really have an understanding of how you want to exploit it and how you're going to use the fact that it's smaller. I think it automatically creates a smaller market niche for it. And I was looking at the analyst reports today, and they were saying that it's probably going to be, a third of the sales, not dominate and become the biggest tablet. I think the biggest tablet of all time, the biggest iPad of all time, is going to be the 15-inch that Apple releases in a few years.
Okay.
Brian also says I'm on crack for saying that.
Yeah, I agree with Brian on that one.
I don't think the Mini long-term is going to cannibalize the sales of the full-size iPad, and I say that because I believe the current full-size iPad is massively heavy and thick compared to the full-size iPads that will exist, 2 or 3 generations down the road. Those are going to be so thin and lightweight and portable, despite their larger screen dimensions, that it's going to be, at that point, it's going to sort of become immaterial whether you get the larger one or the smaller one, because they'll be sort of equally portable and easy to use, and therefore that will just basically give people a choice. What screen size do you want? What screen size are you comfortable with? Without worrying too much about the bulky issue. That's with the full-size iPad. That's going to be kind of a non-issue, down the road. Long term, we're going to start have devices that are paper thin, maybe even flexible, for God's sake. So I think the full-size iPad has a long and fruitful future, especially again when you consider that the full-size iPad is slowly but surely displacing laptops in many cases as the devices that people want to take on the road for productivity as well as consumption. My case, for instance, my situation is a little unusual. When I'm at home, I hate being anywhere but at my home office desk using my iMac. That's how I like to work. Even watch my TV shows. I'll sit in my office chair in my home office and watch my TV shows on my computer. But then when I hit the road, suddenly the iPad makes the most sense instead of a laptop. So in my case, it's desktop iMac for home use, and an iPad for mobility, and that's basically all I need.
And Katie, it's a great question, and I'm sort of in Julio's camp, but I think that this has the potential to be the gateway drug to the iPad, the full-size iPad. The Mini is more affordable. I'm not sure it's necessarily more approachable. I think they're probably equal in that. But if you pick up an iPad Mini and you say, boy, this is great, but it would be even better if I had a bigger screen. Well, guess what? There's an iPad. And I think there's a whole segment of the market out there. We're doing it in reverse. We're going from the bigger screen down to the smaller. I think they're going to start with the smaller and then graduate up to the bigger.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. And we know Apple is not afraid to cannibalize itself. I mean, this was the company who said, we are going to take the best-selling product that we have, the iPod Mini, and we're going to destroy it with the iPod Nano.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember that.
I think you guys are all going to buy me drinks in 2 years. That's what I think. I think the Mini is. I think the Mini is the iPad that everyone always wanted, and I'm not talking about journalists, photographers. I'm talking probably about the average consumer. And I think once it gets going, second, third generation, it's going to be formidable. Yeah.
So it's the one that Geordie LaForge always carried around, right?
Yeah.
He never had a really big one.
Right.
Well, now, one thing before we run out of time that we have not touched on is the camera in this. And it just so happens we have a photography expert.
Yeah, yeah.
So. Wait, who's the photography expert? I don't remember.
Yeah. So the camera's a bit of a disappointment. It's we've been running some tests on it, and the camera in the iPad 3 is excellent. It's a great camera. It's the iSight camera, 5 megapixel. So when we got the Mini, they said iSight camera, 5 megapixel. We thought pretty much the same thing, but we started testing it against the iPad 3 and the iPad 4, and our tests, and also Boink Software is testing it and the camera in the Mini is not, for whatever reason, we don't know why, hardware, software, who knows, something that's tweakable, but it is not as good as the camera in the iPad 3 and the iPad 4. The resolution isn't as good. It doesn't handle backlighting nearly as well. It's interesting. It's a bit of a stumper, actually.
Now, is it still any less, or is it any less taboo to take a picture with your iPad Mini than it is with your 10-inch iPad?
I felt far less conscious shooting with it than I did the big iPad. I still have a problem shooting with the big iPad, as wonderful as it is, especially for stop motion photography and stuff where you mount it and use iStop motion. But I was much more comfortable shooting with the Mini. And I wanted that camera to be good. What I wanted in my wish list, I wanted the same camera that they put in the iPhone 4S. In the Mini. I thought if they did that, that would just be so killer. But because I do think more people will shoot with the Mini than with the big iPad.
I wonder if it has to do with supplier issues. Apple's always juggling suppliers and moving away from this company and towards that company, and then they got to mix and match parts, and they have contracts and so on. I wonder if maybe they had a specification for a camera lens, but whoever they were getting that iPad Mini camera from couldn't meet the specifications.
I'm hoping it's software, John. If it's hardware, we're not going to go anywhere with this model, at least, and that would be kind of sad, because I think, as Katie pointed out, it's a much more approachable tool to use as a camera than the big iPad, which is, granted, you feel very self-conscious holding that thing up.
Well, one of the things I want to get on board in here about this real quickly. One of the things that happened when we first got an iPad 2 with a camera was people say it's ludicrous to stand this thing up in front of the Eiffel Tower and take, family vacation photos with a big iPad. And then I started reviewing these virtual sextants and virtual navigation applications that pass the camera image through to the display and put graduated marks on the display and allow you to calculate distances and angles and figure out where the sun is, even though it may be nighttime. And so you have virtual images superimposed by calculation on a camera display. And then if you need to keep an archive copy, you shoot a photo of that, and then you have a technical archive copy. So that's one of the things that people overlook.
Yeah, there's, once you really dig into it, one of the things that I got hooked on was shooting time-lapse video and stop-motion video, because you have the studio and the cameras all one unit, and it's just, you can do it 10 times faster than you could the traditional way. And you start playing around with some of these specialty things like you're talking about, John, and you go, wow, I'm kind of glad there is a camera on here, because if you're willing to experiment, play a little bit, there's some terrific applications for it. And that's why I had my hopes set high. I thought the Mini really would bring tablet photography, to the forefront. And I'm not so sure. I think a lot of photographer types are going to be a little disappointed when they dig into it like we did.
Derrick, with my devil's advocate hat on, being a professional photographer, given the fact that you were comparing them side by side, are people going to really notice the difference, or is this one of those situations where you walk into the big box store, you look at 7 different TVs sitting side by side, and you see a difference, but if you saw that one of the mid-levels or even low-level TVs alone, you'd say, boy, isn't that gorgeous?
I think that's a great point. I think you're spot on with that. And when I first started shooting with it, in fact, I ran a post yesterday of a shot of the cactus that I shot with the Mini and processed it in iPhoto for iOS and pushed it up online. It looks really good. I mean, it looks really good. And I didn't shoot it with the iPad 3 or the iPad 4. So I think you're right. When you're just using the device itself, it is still very serviceable. It's when you start comparing it to the other devices, which we've been doing all show, we can't help ourselves, right? When you compare to the other devices and you go, why isn't the camera just as good at least as the iPad 3? It should be.
I have the sneaking suspicion that this is intentional on Apple's part because they have a tradition of sort of always, putting out a device is really nice, but it's always leaving you wanting a little bit more. Like if you remember, the iPod Touch initially didn't have a camera, and everybody was asking for a camera.
Yeah.
And they put the camera in there, but the camera was crap. And then they didn't. And then the next year they didn't update the iPad Touch at all. The iPod Touch at all. And finally now, after 4 tries, they finally have a relatively decent camera, but it's still inferior to the one on the iPhone 5. And so Apple does this. They sort of do.
They leave us wanting more.
Yeah, exactly.
They always leave us wanting more.
Well, and I think they're doing that
next year.
I think they're doing that with the Retina display for sure, Julio, right? And they may be doing that with the camera. My only point would be on that: if they're going to do that, then they should not call it the same name. The 5 megapixel iSight camera, same name that they're using for the other 2 devices. They should call it something else.
Good point.
Well, that's the specsmanship. You look at the page at Apple and you see exactly word for word the same text on the left,
exactly.
and the same text on the right. Yeah. And so you're invited to draw the wrong conclusion, and I think that's
that's a nice way of putting it.
Specsmanship, John, I like that. I think that's a new term.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we've been at this for a while. I want to wrap this up by going around the table and asking all of you, would you recommend the iPad Mini? In fact, I'll give you 3 choices. Would you recommend the iPad Mini? Would you wait for the LTE version, or do you think this is something that maybe it's better to wait for the next model? Katie, how about you first?
I think if you don't have an iPad, or if you've never had an iPad with Retina display, or you're longing for more portability in your iPad, if any of those circumstances apply to you, then go get the iPad Mini and be thrilled with it. If you have an iPad 3 or an iPad, well, if you have an iPad 4, you're probably not going to go buy a Mini. But if you have an iPad 3 that you're very happy with, and you're just kind of thinking back and forth about the iPad Mini, go try it, go get some hands-on time. If you don't have the luxury of being able to have multiple devices and justifying having both a Mini and an iPad 3, the iPad 3 is a great device, and I think we will probably see a Retina display along with some other upgrades next year. And I think the Retina display is going to be a big deal for many people. So.
Great. John?
Well, I don't think that this is an issue of choosing the screen size, as Julio mentioned earlier. And as Katie said, if you've already got a full-size iPad, you have to think very hard and long about the specific application for why you need this additional one. Maybe you need it to take to work and it only fits in a certain size lab coat pocket, or you want to put it in your car as a turn-by-turn navigation device, and you have a very specific application for it. In that case, I say go for it. But if you've already got a full-size iPad 2 or 3 or 4, and you're very happy with it, and you don't have a particular need for something that's smaller, then I'd say you might want to wait and see how the product line fleshes out in the future.
Julio?
I think if somebody has sort of been on the verge of making their first iPad purchase and have been sort of stopped short by the price, I think the lower cost of the Mini is great. It's great, first or entry level iPad. I don't think the Retina issue is much of a big deal, particularly for first time iPad buyers who have never had one and probably aren't going to care. The only reason to stay the heck away from the Mini is if you have a sense in your gut that you're going to do more than consumption, that you're going to want to get stuff done on the device. If that's the case, you definitely want to consider the full size.
Derrick, this is your first time here, so you get the last word.
All right, yay. Well, I think it's an absolutely charming device. I like it a lot. And if you want a smaller iPad, if you know, whether you have one now or not, but if you want something that's this form factor, and you're not going to try to write a novel on it, then I think get it. I think get it now and enjoy it. I think you'll have a great time with it. In terms of Wi-Fi versus having cellular, if you have a good tethering option, if your iPhone is set up for for being a hotspot or something, the Wi-Fi is usable. If you don't, though, I tell you, Wi-Fi can be very unpredictable in the outside world. Once you get out of your comfy confines of your home or whatever, I would probably pony up the extra money for the cellular, because this is a device that's on the go. It's an on-the-go device, and you want to be able to use it no matter where you are.
I'm not sure I can add anything to all of those comments, because I tend to agree with pretty much all of them. I think, Derrick, you make a great point, though, about the extra portability of this. Not that the original iPad isn't, but this is more so. So I think you're spot on that.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what the market says, right?
Yeah. What we say doesn't matter.
I think it's going to be a killer Christmas either way.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. Katie Floyd, Julio Ojeda-Zapata, Derrick Story, John Martellaro, thank you, everyone, for being on the MacJury this time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thanks,
Great
Chuck.
to be here.
We'll do it again soon. Folks, for the first weekend on the iPad mini, the verdict is in. I'm Chuck Joyner. Please check our show notes. I'll have links to everything that our panelists do, along with some of the products we talked about. Until the next time, thanks for listening. MacVoicesTV is part of the MacVoices Group at MacVoicesGroup.com. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at BackbeatMedia.com.